Hello, History 363. So today we're going to be talking about the mechanics of the Roman Republic. It's actually part of a series on just the institutions of the Roman Republic that make its system work. And today I want to talk about the magisterial offices. Because the Roman Republic is, it's not like there's a single president or a prime minister, but rather the aristocrats and the aristocratic political class that run the Roman Republic achieve their power through holding a series of annual offices. And indeed, the fact that most offices, save one, the censorship, are held annually is actually a key part to how the Republican Constitution works. If we want to view the Roman Republic as an exercise in aristocratic power sharing, you don't want any one aristocrat getting too powerful, and one way to prevent that is to simply limit the time in office. Another key factor, and this is actually true for basically all of the magisterial offices, is they are held as a college. There is no single magistrate. Rather, each magistrate shares power with a college of other magistrates. So this fact also, in many ways, dilutes the power of any individual over the res publica. Now, a aristocratic career path therefore involves holding a series of magisterial offices over the course of a lifetime, with the end goal being ideally the consulship, the most powerful executive office, and above that, for usually ex-consuls, the censorship. Maybe not the most immediately powerful, but perhaps the most prestigious of all of these offices. And indeed, the path from the more junior magisterial offices all the way up towards the consulship and the censorship is called the Cursus Honorum, the course of offices. Indeed, ascending up the Cursus Honorum really is how young, ambitious Roman aristocrats really sort of organize their lives. So let's actually just today talk about the Cursus Honorum. One thing that I should stress, in the late Republic, the Cursus Honorum becomes very, very rigid. Particularly after the reforms of a Roman dictator named Sulla, so that you actually have to progress really strictly up a sort of set ladder. You have to be quaestor first, and then aedile, and then praetor, and then consul, and then censor, with set minimum ages. During much of the Middle Republic, and again, now that we're in the 3rd century BC, we certainly are in the Middle Republic, however strictly we want to define it. The Cursus Honorum is much more fluid. It's not uncommon for some men to skip offices here and there, and indeed some very successful generals like Scipio Africanus or Titus Flaminius, men we'll come to later, notably skip big offices, including, say, the praetorship. Regardless, most men tend to start off by holding some of the more junior offices and ascend up to the senior offices. And there is a major reform in 180 that seems to mandate that a man must hold the praetorship before the consulship, while also setting some minimum ages for the offices. This is the Lex Vilia Annalis. So despite that, when I'm talking about the Cursus Honorum, it is, well, there is sort of this hierarchy of offices and this progression of offices, there's a lot more fluidity and flexibility in the Middle Republic, and it becomes much more rigid in the Late Republic. So just something to keep in mind as we start looking at the careers of individual aristocrats later in the course. Now, the most sort of common way to enter into the Roman political system through elective office is actually to start off by running for military tribune. So we'll talk more about the Roman army later this week, but each of the 4 consular legions that are raised each year have 6 military tribunes. And those military tribunes are elected officers. They're elected in the Comitia Tributa and the Tribal Assembly. We're also going to do much more on assemblies very shortly. And so there's 24 elected every year. And again, this is usually a way that young aristocrats, maybe who've already somewhat distinguished themselves in warfare, sort of break onto the political scene. And also in serving as military tribunes, it gives them the opportunity to interface with common Roman soldiers who sometimes become common Roman voters after their discharge. Now, to the office of military tribune is not considered a magisterial office. It does not, for example, give you access to the Senate, but it's perhaps the most common office that men run for, canvass for, go around shaking hands, slapping backs, kissing babies in the forum to get elected military tribune. And also, serving as a military tribune is a way to distinguish yourself militarily, which also is important to have a strong military reputation as you start moving up into the next offices. We might say that technically the Cursus Honorum begins, though, with the quaestorship. This is the first office that allows its holders, once they leave office, to enter into the Senate. So the quaestorship is really important because once you're a quaestor once for 1 year, when your year is up, the next census rolls around, the censor enrolls, unless you've done something really bad, the censor enrolls the ex-quaestors into the Senate, and now you're a senator basically for life, as long as in terms of good behavior, you're likely to be a senator for life. So the quaestorship is important. Win that one election, and now you can be a member of the Senate and can be involved in senatorial deliberations and votes to make policy. So the quaestors themselves are primarily sort of administrative, financial, logistics officials. And of course, it depends what your quaestorial assignment is. Quaestors are assigned, for example, to the treasury, where basically you're counting money and making sure the right amount's going in and going out. Quaestors are also assigned to armies that eventually will be going overseas. And when they're assigned to armies, in many ways, they probably resemble military quartermasters, not just handling money, although a lot of money does move through armies, particularly soldiers pay money for supplies, but also doing things like collecting and issuing grain, supplies, clothing, weapons. That's going to flow through the quaestor. So it's actually an extremely important office, even though it's held by a relatively young Roman aristocrat. So the quaestorship is sort of your entry-level office. The exact number will probably fluctuate based on the needs of armies. In the Middle Republic, it's probably about 8, although we don't always know for sure. It will be ultimately 20 by the late Republic. So we have the quaestorship. Another junior office, and indeed an office that some men will actually jump directly to, if they, again, in the more fluid situation in the Mid-Republic, you might not hold a quaestorship, but you would definitely want to run for aedile. So the aediles, as I mentioned, were initially a plebeian office, and because the plebeians sort of, needed people who could run the markets and sweep the streets, aediles kind of have a function of city managers, market superintendents. However, doing that, it turns out, is really popular. Surprise, people like good governance. And so the patricians start demanding that aediles be elected from the entire citizen body, which means patricians can run. And so there are now going to be 2 plebeian aediles and also 2 curule aediles. And technically, the curule aediles are magistrates, whereas the plebeian aediles are just officers of the plebs. And so the curule aediles can actually sit in the curule chair, a chair made of elephant ivory that is the chair of a proper Roman magistrate. The distinction, of course, pretty much is quite limited. They do a lot of the same things, not just city management, but they have a role of law in settling market disputes, and actually aediles will develop a good deal about the market law, regulating weights and measures, again, keeping the streets clean. As the Romans are able to fund more and more impressive public spectacles, the aediles are also really critical in running the ludi, the festivals that involve dramatic performances, the comedic performances, and most famously, by the 3rd century BC, if not earlier, gladiatorial games. Those are all staged. I mean, the producer, you might say, the state producer is an aedile. And as such, this is another really good entry-level position if you want to go all the way towards the consulship or censorship. If you're the guy putting on an amazing show and the various thousands of voters come in and say, wow, that was a terrific show, the games are great, the gladiators were bloody, the comedy was hilarious, you might remember, oh, and the aedile who produced it, I'll remember that fine young man when he runs for praetor, consul, censor. So aediles not only get to do that, oftentimes they'll actually kick in their own money to make sure those shows are particularly memorable. And then, of course, their names are sort of pasted at the top. Aediles, again, the plebeian and curule aediles, an important entry-level position. We also have for plebeians the tribunes of the plebs. And of course, we've talked about how in early Rome it seems that these sort of represent almost a kind of like parallel state or alternate state. But they increasingly are co-opted into the aristocratic career path. Indeed, by the 2nd century BC, it seems that even if you've missed the quaestorship and aedileship, if you're elected tribune of the plebs, you will be automatically enrolled in the Senate during the next census. So it's an office that entitles you to serve in the Senate. Although in many instances, young ambitious plebeians are already serving as quaestor or aedile before they serve as tribune of the plebs. So there's 10 elected every year. The numbers have increased over the split of the orders, but they hit 10 and stay at 10 to the end of the Republic. And as we've seen, tribunes of the plebs have a lot of functions, protecting the rights of individual citizens with their intercessio, proposing legislation before the concilium plebis, and indeed the plebeian tribunes will be the most important sort of legislators because they can summon the concilium plebis, propose legislation, and have it pass. And after the Lex Hortensia of 287, it's binding on all of the Roman people. And of course, it's also just a good office for moving up because if you're tribune of the plebs, you give a lot of speeches before the Roman people. You develop a kind of connection before the Roman people as someone who says, look, I'm advocating for you. And it does seem that, even if, in the kind of course of a Roman career path, the same aristocrat might at various times in his career be more sort of haughtily aristocratic and more sort of open to, popular pressure. Being tribune of the plebs is the popular sort of phase of an aristocratic career. That's when you really reach out and promise to defend the Roman people and stick up for their prerogatives and look out for what's right for them, even if you sort of revert to haughty aristocratic form once you're consul or censor. But you're tribune, you got more elections to win, so you try to, in both rhetoric and action, placate the Roman people. So we have our quaestors, our aediles, our tribunes of the plebs. The praetorship, we've talked about the formation of the praetorship as part of the settlement of 367 BC. The number of praetors, initially there's just one, the praetor who eventually becomes the urban praetor. Those numbers are increased to initially 2, an urban praetor and a praetor for the foreigners, the peregrine praetor. And the peregrine praetor may sort of start out primarily as simply a military commander who's set out to a part of Italy that needs either another general or a governor. Eventually the peregrine praetor, as we get towards the late Republic, stays in Rome and largely deals with the increasing number of judicial cases involving a Roman citizen and a foreigner. And those go through the peregrine praetor, whereas the urban praetor deals with a lot of the civil torts between Roman citizens. And indeed, the urban praetor is really a key person for the development of what's called the formulary procedure in Roman law. Namely, praetors start getting many of the same case over and over and over again. They hear that, it's the same thing about the cow, or it's the same thing about the fence, or it's the same thing about the spoiled wine. And what they actually start doing, because they ultimately have to farm out a lot of the fact-finding for these cases to appointed judges, judices, a judex is someone who the praetor says, okay, here's how the sort of law will be applied, but I'm going to appoint a judex to actually hear the case and determine the kind of the facts that then can be fit to the law that I've applied. And so the formulary procedure is in some ways a sort of list of writs that if this is the case, then this is how I would find. If these are the facts, this is how I would rule. And then a judex is determined, are those indeed the facts? And so this formulary procedure, on one hand, is initially, each praetor sort of issues his own at the start of each year, so he can completely change it. As time goes by, actually pretty quickly probably, praetors are lazy. They say, I'm just going to use most of the formula that my predecessor used, except for a few things. So actually, in some ways, there's a kind of hive mind by praetors that creates a whole set of formulary law. And this eventually completely displaces the old leges actiones, these old kind of set of very writs that have a very precise wording. The formulary procedure is actually much more flexible, and because the praetor can actually change it whenever he wants, although usually they issue these decrees at the start of the year, it actually allows for a lot of flexibility. If one of these kind of formula isn't working, praetor can just say, I'm going to try a different one for the problem with the fence or the goats or the wine cask cases. So praetors the urban praetor is very important for the development of Roman law, although both praetors initially seem to have quite significant military functions. If needed, an extra pair of legions, the urban legions or the city legions, can be raised to both defend the city, or oftentimes they just get used as an extra army when an extra army is needed. And eventually more praetors are created, first 4 and then 6. And these praetors also command armies in provinces overseas. The first two praetors after the urban and peregrine praetor are created for Sicily, and then subsequently new praetors are just created because as the Romans are operating so many armies overseas, they need 6 by the Middle Republic, and by the Late Republic 8. So now praetors importantly have imperium. They have imperium, the right to decapitate or flog a Roman citizen or a non-Roman citizen for that matter, in the context, which is critically in the context of military command. So you need imperium, you need that power to be able to functionally command armies, and praetors have it. The Romans, at some point, we still kind of are debating at what point, whether it's right from the get-go or sort of develops over the 3rd century, developed the idea that the imperium is somehow less than the imperium of a consul. So if a consul and a praetor are operating in the same province, the same provincia, the same area of operations, the consul's imperium would precede the praetor's imperium, which means the consul can tell the praetor what to do if they're in the same province. So we have 6 praetors in the Middle Republic. Now, of course, you've noticed that it is kind of a rough pyramid. We have 24 military tribunes who are like, hey, I won an election. I've got a shot at a higher office. We have 8 quaestors, 4 aediles. Not everyone who's running for aedile has been quaestor. 10 tribunes of the plebs. And then we have this kind of choke point at the praetorship of first 2 and then 4 and then 6, but still only 2 consuls. So at the very top we have the consulship. These are the eponymous magistrates. So if you are the consul, you give your name to the year. Remember, the Romans don't say 201 BC or they when they want to recall what year it was, they recall it by the name of the magistrate, which means actually to kind of figure out what year it is, you sort of have these long lists of magistrates. You can say, oh, that year. So again, you would not refer to 59 BC as 59 BC, or you could refer to it by Olympiad or from what point the city was founded. But the most common way, we say the year that Caesar and Bibulus were consuls. And that's how you know what year you're talking about. So that, of course, makes the consuls important. Again, consuls have imperium, as we've discussed. Their primary function, however, is military commanders. And indeed, one important thing about the consulship in the Roman Republic is as soon as the consuls are elected, they're in the city maybe for another month or so while they levy the armies and handle what affairs they need to. And then they go off to the provinces they're assigned, their theater of operations, and they fight for most of the rest of the year. And then they come back and their year in office is actually oftentimes is already expired. So the city of Rome itself oftentimes does not have consuls in it, which means actually the highest magistrate is oftentimes the urban praetor. So the consulship again only lasts 1 year. Now, as the Romans are operating with armies, they oftentimes realize, gosh, we have a praetor in a province, in an area of operations. He's doing pretty well. We have a consul in a province, and he's doing pretty well. He's beating the enemy, but the campaign isn't over. But wouldn't it be nice to keep him there? And of course, sometimes there's simply so many armies that need commanders that all of the elected consuls and praetors can't do it. So during the Samnite Wars, the Romans developed the concept of prorogatio, where they say, okay, a consul, his year in office is up, but we're going to extend his imperium as if he were still consul, hence pro consule, pro praetore, or he's still as if he's still a praetor, if it's a praetor, so that he can continue to hold imperium and can continue to continue to do what needs to be done in that province. And then he comes home, gives up his imperium, and goes back to being a private citizen. Now, this has to be usually proposed by the Senate, and at least for a time is ratified by the people in a popular vote, although this may be kind of a rubber stamp. But this also means that we will have pro-praetors and pro-consuls operating whose year in office is up, but their command has been extended simply because either they're doing a really good job, and let's let them finish the war, they know what they're doing, or, hey, we just need someone there and we don't have any active magistrates to handle that function. So that's when you hear the term proconsul, pro-praetor, that's what I'm talking about. Finally, we have, if you've been consul, that really, again, is in many ways the highest office in the kind of spiritual sense. If you were a consul, indeed, you are said to ennoble your family. Your family from now on are nobiles, who have become ennobled simply by the fact that they have a consular ancestor. But there is one office that is higher. Occasionally, like Appius Claudius had held the censorship before the consulship, but usually the censorship is the domain of ex-consuls, usually ex-consuls who have won crushing victories, and this propels them to the highest office. Now, the censorship is not an annual office. It's an unusual office. There are 2 censors. They're elected once every 5 years, although their term in office is only about 18 months. And their job is to conduct the census, a count of all Roman citizens, and an assessment of all of their property, And that count is critically important for how the Roman Republic works. It is that count that determines who's eligible for military service. It is the property assessment that determines what level of taxes you will pay as a Roman citizen. And the censors who also, this is where we get our term censor, do exert the right of sort of moral supervision of the citizen body. So they can kick somebody out. They can actually deprive someone of their citizenship by refusing to inscribe them on the rolls. More commonly, though, they discipline senators. So if a senator has been particularly, has not done something blameworthy, they can be kicked out of the Senate. They can also, for the Roman cavalrymen, the Roman knights who have been issued a horse at public expense, a public horse, if they are either have done something that's blameworthy or simply haven't done a very good job taking care of the horse, they can have their public horse taken away from them. And that's also considered a disgraceful thing. So it's the fact that the censors cast judgment on Roman citizens is where we get our term censor, who doesn't let a movie or TV show go forward or book go forward. Although censors actually don't do what we would call censorship really in the Roman Republic. It is that count, that census takes about 18 months. During that time, the censors also issue contracts for public building. So this is actually a really good way to aggrandize yourself. If you can make it to the censorship, you can spend public money building something that is both beautiful and useful to the Roman people, and then you can slap your name on it and be remembered by that. That's why when we talk about Appius Claudius Caecus, we have the Aqua Appia and we have the Appian Way, the Via Appia. He and his family are going to be remembered by that going forward. So it's actually very helpful for launching the next generation of your family on their political careers. All right, this is a bit longer video, so that is the Cursus Honorum. Next time we're going to talk about the role of the Roman people and how they exert what influence they have on the Roman political system through voting. Maybe a very important topic as we enter election season. All right, see you soon.